Right, we are on record. So, look, Stan, really pleased to have you here. And like I said, this is just a platform to have really casual conversations with medical device leaders, founders, and professionals to discuss their journeys in a bit more depth, what they do, what they've done, why they do it, and for them to also share their insights with other aspiring professionals with the industry. So, if you don't mind, you could just kindly introduce yourself and give a little bit of background on yourself.
Sure. My name is Stanton Rowe. I'm the CEO of Biomedical. I spent well over 3 decades working mostly in cardiovascular device development. I was the chief scientific officer at Edwards for about 15 years. I also spent about 13 years at Johnson & Johnson. Over the years, I've helped found 9 companies, and I've had 5 exits on those. So I have a fairly broad experience and certainly an in-depth experience in the cardiovascular segment especially.
Sure, absolutely. And Stan, out of interest, with your career at J&J, so in terms of before you founded your first medical device company, were you at J&J prior to that?
Yes, yeah, I was.
So I guess having quite a successful career at J&J, what were you doing out of interest at the point that you moved to found your first medical device company, and what kind of led you to do that?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I really think maybe it gets back to what preparation do you need to found your own company, right? And I think as much as I've always appreciated people who have tremendous depth of experience, what you really need to be able to start and run a company is a broad set of experiences. So you obviously need to understand markets, technologies, the process of product development, the regulatory and clinical. You need to understand the key opinion leaders. You need to understand the market dynamics, the competition, and then things like fundraising. So there's a huge breadth of experience that is required to really be an effective leader of a startup. And I got a lot of that at J&J, and then what I didn't get, I had to learn on the job.
Interesting. So what things do you think you did get from J&J, and what things did you think you did have to develop?
Yeah. So I had done marketing and R&D and clinical trials and advanced technology and strategic planning all at J&J. So that was great background. I felt like I knew those things and I knew the market very well. What I had never done before was fundraising, which it's a difficult job, right? I call it kissing frogs, right? You just have to talk to a lot of different sources of funding, and you never know who's going to say yes. And you have to be prepared for a whole lot of rejection, right? You're going to be turned down 95% of the time, 99% of the time. So it's not an easy task, but you get better at it over time. And you also know what to expect, right? And that is that a lot of it's not what you're proposing is not going to fit a lot of venture capital funds' interest. And it's not about you, it's not about the technology. You just have to accept that and move on to the next one.
Yeah. Interesting. I guess from my perspective, it will be interesting to get into your mindset, having a successful career at J&J. What drove you to actually go down a path of the unknown? Because surely it might actually be easier when someone's, let's say, younger and their career's not established because you feel there's not as much opportunity cost. But for you could argue there's quite a bit of opportunity cost there, right? Like a successful career at J&J and to go into complete unknown. So what's your mindset there?
So I was a vice president at J&J, and I really loved my career there, but J&J had purchased Cordis Corporation at the time, and they were integrating the two companies. And frankly, they did a miserable job at it. And McKinsey run it, and it didn't work out well. They ended up over the next 2 years losing the majority of the J&J management and the majority of the Cordis management. And it really set the whole company back tremendously for years. So I was very unhappy with the way they were integrating, and I had a choice to, I said, I want to leave, but I could have gone to other big companies, and I looked at doing that. And, at the end of the day, I decided it would be better to start my own company. And I did that with one of my friends from J&J. And it was, it was tough. It was sailing off into unknown waters, right? Things are really comfortable when you're working in a big company, and they're very uncomfortable when you start off with a new company. You never know whether you're going to succeed. But to me, the real question, Junaid, was it worth the risk, right? In medicine, we often do this risk-benefit analysis, right? And I've been approached to be part of startups before, and I turned them down. To me, what we had proposed to do was big enough and impactful enough to be worth the risk, and that was to develop the first transcatheter heart valve, something no one had ever done before. And I believe there was a big opportunity and a big need for it, although there was an awful lot of controversy about whether that was true at the time.
Really interesting. Really interesting. So from the sounds of it, you had a bigger purpose, essentially, and that probably drove you to, I guess, first go on that journey and see that journey through, right? Because you said that being in a big company, things are quite comfortable.
Sure.
And you would have definitely had the opportunity to do that somewhere else, even though you were unhappy with J&J. But it's funny. So did it actually take the things not going how you wanted them to go at J&J for you to actually start thinking about this? Or did you already have this on your mind before? How was it? How did it go?
No, I think if, we had created, I had managed the Palmeshat stent, which was the most successful device release, I think, in the history of med devices. We sold $650 million in our first year of sales. It was very successful, and there was lots of opportunity to improve things. It's just that integration threw the company into chaos. And if they had done that well, I might have stayed on and tried to contribute more. I think I could have. But I think, under those circumstances, it made me rethink, what do I want to do? And how can I have an impact? And, doing this venture. And I got to say, a key part of that, too, was the fact that my wife was very supportive of that. I spent a lot of years there, and she was willing to allow me to take that risk, despite the fact that we had a young family. And that was a big deal and an important part of my decision making.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm always intrigued as well, like with people in the industry that do found companies, because I find that a lot of people I speak to, they're more like inventors or innovators who are trying to learn how to go about running a business. But in hindsight, do you think you had like an entrepreneurial flair to you as well? Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I mean, if you think about it, I mean, even though it was J&J, we were a very small business there. We were entrepreneurs developing this stent. There was no other interventional cardiology group in J&J. There was no other cardiology group at J&J. And This is a device that they licensed from a couple of doctors. And we were kind of a renegade group there. And so it was astounding that a small group like we had actually drove J&J earnings with the launch of this product that it took them by surprise. So they said, well, we really got to build on this. And that's when they went out to acquire something to tack on to what we had done. So I felt like we did really pioneering work by creating the first coronary stent that was available for the treatment of restenosis in interventional cardiology. It was a big, big deal to launch that first product. And it was a good basis for what we did at PVT. Some of the skepticism that I heard early on when I was at J&J and I talked with cardiologists, I had many of them say, you can't put stainless steel in someone's coronary artery. It will thrombose and they'll die. You're going to kill people. And of course, when I developed the transcatheter valve, I heard a whole lot more. We treat all the patients. We have perfect outcomes. There's no such thing as a non-surgical patient. You can't make something like that work. We use 30 sutures to hold a valve in place. You're going to use how many? 0? Never going to be stable. You can't make something like that durable. You can't stent aortic stenosis out of the way. We heard every objection you can imagine to develop this. And of course, huge headwinds from the cardiothoracic surgeons who their experience taught them that this was a fool's errand and would never work. So we faced huge headwinds developing that product with those key customers who were they were the experts in aortic stenosis. So I was a little bit prepared for that from some of that early experience at J&J.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess with such an innovative product like yours, it must have been really challenging taking it from idea to product. Do you mind just going into that journey in a little bit more depth in terms of maybe how long it took? What were some of the main challenges that happened to get to that end product? I don't know if you're able to go into that in a bit more depth.
Yeah, so we could spend a couple of days talking about that, but I'll give you the
All right, yeah.
version is, Dr. Cribier, Alain Cribier from Rouen, France, brought this idea to me, and I was intrigued by it. I knew no one had ever done it before. Scoured the literature, found some early animal experience with a guy by the name of Henning Ruud Andersen from Denmark, who had done some amazing work, filed some key patents in that area, but never did anything else because he couldn't get industry interested or get any financial support. But he did some early amazing work. It's kind of all that existed at the time. I brought in Marty Leon, who's one of the top interventional guys in the world. Stan Rubinovich, who worked with me at J&J, and the four of us founded Percutaneous Valve Technologies in 1999. We got some early funding. I went up and down Sand Hill Road, and where the venture capitalists were in San Francisco. I'd been a VP at J&J, so I could get in to see them. And I would tell them my story. I wanted to develop the first percutaneous heart valve. And they would say, well, that's interesting. I haven't heard of that before. We'll look into it. Well, what does we'll look into it mean? It means they don't really understand the area. They need to talk to the experts. Well, who are the experts? Well, the experts are the cardiothoracic surgeons. And these guys had absolutely nothing good to say about transcatheter valves, which threatened the core part of their business, right? And of course, the whole concept made no sense to them. And when they said there's no market for it and there's no such thing as a non-surgical patient, it's an interesting thing about medicine, right? No one asked the stupid question, which was, why would you send a non-surgical patient to a surgeon? What do surgeons do? I think they do surgery. So why would you send a non-surgical patient? Of course, they never saw those patients. All those patients were sitting with the cardiologist and sometimes internal medicine guys. So the surgeon wasn't lying when he said there's no such thing as a non-surgical patient. They rarely turned down a patient because only the best patients showed up for them. Now, in addition to that, there are patients who kind of voted with their feet. They might have been, their cardiologist might have said, you need to have surgery. And the patient may have said, I'm sorry, I'm 85 years old. I'm not going to have my chest cracked open. And they voted with their feet. So it's also that segment who might have been referred, but basically refused referral because the only option was surgery. So those early days of fundraising were really, really challenging because the experts in the field, we had no support from them at all. So you had to talk to cardiologists, and not many cardiologists knew much about that area. A few had done balloon aortic valvuloplasty, which was kind of a failed procedure from the 1980s. But that was really the vast amount of experience they had with treating the aortic valve stenosis. So we pretty much had to start from scratch. I finally got funding from a group out of Boston called Oxford Bioscience Partners and a group out of Israel. They funded our early work after we had raised a little bit of angel money. And then I struck a deal with a group out of Israel that would do contract engineering for us early on. They were the second largest contract engineering group in Israel, had some really impressive guys. And so we thought we could start there. But I never really liked contract engineering. Contract engineering has some fundamental flaws. One is, to do it right, I need to train the engineers in what it is they're developing. So I'm going to invest time and effort in them, and then they're going to go on and do a different project. That's very inefficient. Secondly, their incentives are kind of all wrong. Contract engineering, their incentive is take longer, right? So they have no vested interest in the outcome. So I tried to strike a different deal with that group. So I said, look, I'm going to pay you for accomplishing milestones. Okay? So here, I'm going to give you this milestone-based thing, but you only get paid when you complete successfully that milestone. That way you have a vested interest in moving this forward, not just taking more time. Secondly, I want to call on the engineers. I want to be able to hire them if they're good at the end of our contract. And then thirdly, I'll pay you the cost for what you're doing, but in lieu of profit, I'm going to give you equity in the company, further giving them an incentive to make it work. In fact, it was a really good structure for both of us, because when Edwards finally acquired us several years later from our contract, that contract doubled the value of that company.
No, thanks.
And it was great for me because I hired all the engineers. And basically I set up shop with our development efforts in Israel. And I rented basically space in that contract engineering company for our development efforts. They were very efficient and run by some really bright guys who are still active today.
Awesome. To be honest, thanks for taking me through that. There's so many things I feel I can pick there. One of them I just want to start with is I speak to lots of founders and they feel that they have a very good idea and they are struggling with the funding. I think with everything you've said, you should be very qualified to answer that because you struggled a lot with funding, right? Due to the idea, what you were trying to do, and you kind of moved forward a little bit there. You did get access to the funding. Can you just give a little bit of insight and advice for people who are trying to get funding? What advice you would have for them and how they should go about doing it?
Well, I mean, a lot of the art is telling your story in a compelling way, right? Venture capitalists talk to 100 or more companies before they invest in one. How do you stand out? How is this a really compelling opportunity for them to make money and for them to have confidence in you? Especially given the fact that, I mean, venture capitalists doesn't have the best track record, right? Of 10 investments, they have one or two that are really successful. So they have to be very selective because there is so much attrition from these early startups. So I think you have to tell a story. You have to focus on how am I going to help patients? How does this make sense for physicians, hospitals, and payers? And you have to do that in a way that's engaging. Secondly, you have to have a team because I really do think that sophisticated investors invest in a team of people they have confidence in. So you have to have a really good team. And I really believe the best teams are diverse teams because if everybody thinks just like you, well, one of you is redundant. So you really want people who think differently and have different perspectives on your team. And that will make it a much stronger group. So I think you end up refining your story over time, and I would encourage people to do that. When you finish giving a presentation, the questions that people ask you tell you about the strength of your presentation and where gaps are. So you have to continuously improve that presentation and anticipate a lot of the questions that you hear over time. And so you should get better and better at telling that story. So, you know, and by the way, you're still going to get turned down a lot. It's okay.
No. Stan, where do you think people should be allocating their funds to? Because there's so many things you could invest in. Surely there's a risk people end up investing in the wrong sorts of things. So, yeah, what would you advise there?
Well, where do you invest your time, your money, and your efforts in things that make a difference? I'm not a big fan of incremental innovation. I think it's a great place for people to learn. Go start at a big company when you get your biomedical engineering degree or mechanical engineering degree. If you have an interest in this business, go pay your dues at a big company because they can train you and you will learn a lot. You'll learn a lot about operations and finance and product development and quality systems and regulatory. Those are great places to learn. Then if you want to be an entrepreneur, you can take that learning outside, which is what you're going to have to know, to create your own company. So I think to me, as you move forward in your career, you're going to be thinking more and more about, how do I make an impact? And I think doing things that really change outcomes for patients, well, that's something you can always be proud of. I did something that really improved the lives of patients. You can do that sometimes in big companies, but that's more of a rarity, I'd like to say. Frequently, you can do that in startups. But again, there are big risks to doing that, and that the percentage of success is fairly low.
Yeah. When you sold your company then to Edward Life Sciences, as I understand you joined them. So what was the thinking there then, in terms of, do you mind taking through the mindset in terms of selling the company? What quite happened there? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a big skip over from where I started with fundraising, but we finally made better and better product, and we took it through first in human. It was shocking to people that this technology seemed to really work. And so I ended up selling this to Edwards Life Sciences. Edwards was the world's leader in heart valves. And they could have easily said, and in fact, their scientific advisory board advised against buying PVT. But their scientific advisory board was surgeons. So, of course, because those were the customers for their surgical heart valves. So they took a big risk to take on this technology, and especially given a risk that it was disruptive to their surgical business, right? None of their customers liked it when they bought the company. So I give Mike Salem and that team huge credit for the risk that they took in buying percutaneous valve technologies. They were very gracious in the way they integrated the company. All of the employees were offered jobs. They wanted to keep everybody. We also offered them something they didn't have, which was relationships and understanding in cardiology. Their strength was with surgeons and not cardiologists. So we were able to bring that into play. And they had capabilities that we didn't begin to have. We didn't have regulatory and clinical strength. They had, you should see the operations for our surgical heart valve group. You have to sew. Every heart valve is a handmade product. So it takes hours and hours to sew these things. So imagine it takes about a year to train one operator in this. And they have hundreds of operators who help manufacture by hand these heart valves. Scaling something like that, processing tissue from around the world in a regulated manner, to be able to bioprocess pericardial tissue. It was a kind of a staggering idea to me. So I knew we needed help, and the best place for percutaneous valve technologies to land was Edwards, because they had the most capability. So I was really lucky that they were interested in that and we could reach an agreement. That integration was huge in moving the company forward. Despite that, there were huge, I know you guys are focused on regulatory. In all of their wisdom, the FDA decided to put the review of percutaneous valves in the surgical heart valve group, because they knew the most about heart valves. But of course, they had every interest in making this slow and painful, if at all. If they could kill it, they would. So the result of that was that the Sapien valve, which was the name of the valve that came out of the regulatory cycle, was launched 5 years in Europe before it was the US. In fact, the United States was the 42nd country in the world to get this life-saving technology. Okay? We got it right after Tunisia, which was 41.
Wow.
So it really made, at the end of the day, the FDA took a really introspective look to better understand their processes and how they do things. And I think they've changed a lot. And a good bit of that had to do with lessons learned from how badly they managed the approval of this product, which, again, in the pivotal trials showed there was a life-saving product. The number needed to treat to save a life was 5. A breakthrough pharmaceutical is 2 in 100.
Really appreciate that insight, Stan. Like, just touching on the regulatory piece, how important do you think it is for medical device companies to engage into regulatory earlier on in the process? Or what stage should they do it? Because lots of people I speak to, they say we've not gone to regulatory yet. What's your views on that?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, you have to implement those quality systems very early and make them really good, because one of the obstacles for you to be acquired is to have, not have your ducks in a row from a quality perspective. EFS, early feasibility studies, are a great way to do early studies in the US. You can adapt both the protocol and the patients that you treat in the early clinical experience. And I think that's a very progressive way to do early clinicals. The challenge still in early feasibility studies in the US is that the protocol, not the protocol approval, but the IRB approval and the contracts take way too long to get approvals. And that's outside the FDA's domain. That's really in the domain of the hospitals. And they can take a year. So the FDA may take 3 months, and the hospital will take a year to get started. And that's very costly and very time consuming for startups. So many startups still go internationally to do their first in human, and then they start a parallel path in the United States. I do believe that it makes a lot of sense when, before you do design freeze, but when you're close to design freeze, that you go in and do a pre-sub with FDA. And I think you need to do a lot of homework to do a good pre-sub, because you're going to be teaching them about your technology, why it's important, who are the patients, who does it fit in with. You need to bring top physicians in to help support that discussion. And it's a critical one, because first impressions do matter, even at FDA.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could talk to you for ages more, but I kind of want to move a little bit further into journey. So once, for example, you sold PVT to Edward Life Sciences, how much time did you spend at Edward Life Sciences from there?
15 years.
15 years. Sorry, I just want to go into that, because you've developed an amazing product, so innovative, been on this entrepreneurial journey. Was the plan to be at Edward Life Sciences for that long? What was your...
No, I would have thought I would have been there for 2 or 3 years. But, first of all, I was able to help move that product forward from within Edwards. And then I was offered a kind of an opportunity, or help create that opportunity, to define next generations of structural heart disease products. And so we created this entrepreneurial group within Edwards called Advanced Technology Group. And it was a pretty good sized group, and it's really helped define a lot of Edwards' most promising products even today. And so I could continue my journey in entrepreneurship within a larger company. There are very few companies that are really entrepreneurial. So I think at least while I was there, we had a really good run of developing some really unique concepts, taking them through first in human, and then spinning them out into their own business units at Edwards. And so it was a very fulfilling 15 years.
Absolutely. Really interesting. And I want to also get into Nidus Biomedical, if you don't mind, in terms of what you actually do and how that came about as well.
Yeah, so after 15 years, I thought, that it's time to move on and do something else. I really enjoyed my time at Edwards. It had grown hugely while I was there, largely because of the transcatheter heart valve, which represents a large percentage of their sales and profit. So I founded the incubator, which was first called NXT and now Nidus Biomedical. And there are two different kinds of incubators. One houses outside companies, and they provide services like, they can provide patent access, administration, facilities, payroll, lots of things to help small companies be efficient in their early stages, right? Till they get too big, and then they'll spin out of the incubator. And so they're very cost efficient in that regard. Our incubator is a little different in that, I've got some of the best innovators that came out of Edwards, and we're all, we're very productive in terms of new products. So we have 7 ongoing projects at Edwards, at Nidus, 7 ongoing projects. They're all build to buy projects except for 2. So 5 build to buy projects, with the 6th one coming on. And these are projects that are already destined to go into strategics. So we take it to a certain point, and they have a call option to buy the company. And it's kind of tailor-made for what they want. So it's something we've agreed upon early on, but we've typically created that intellectual property to address a need that they have. So we have quite a few of those projects ongoing, and I like that structure because it's kind of a win-win. It's very predictable for us. We know where this is going. We know they want that this product definition is something they've already bought into. We've agreed upon a price at the end of the journey, and we get funding for that without having to go work too hard collecting venture capital money. So that's worked really, really well for us.
Absolutely. I'd be intrigued to know, how do you go about, because obviously I can see the incentive for a startup to wanting the service that you're providing. How do you go about selecting the startups that you would want to work with? Is there anything in particular you're looking for in selecting?
Yeah. So again, we're not bringing in startups. We create our own startups internally. So, that process means, we are looking at concepts that we think will be attractive to outside companies, or sometimes the outside companies, a strategic, will say, I need something to compete here. And we will go out, evaluate all the competition, meet with key opinion leaders. We'll frequently buy and test competitive product. And then we'll come back to the strategic and say, well, look, this is what you ought to build. Here's the product definition for it. Here's the timeline and the cost. And that will become one of our projects.
Interesting. So from your perspective, what do you think are some of the unmet clinical needs that you're seeing most urgently right now? From your point of view, how do you think the landscape's changed over the last 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think there's still, in the cardiovascular sector, we've made a lot of progress in treating peripheral vascular disease, at least below the knee disease. Probably still in the smaller vessels distally, we still have patients that have challenges and amputations still occur, but we made real progress there. Actually, this week, New England Journal of Medicine talked about carotid artery disease, large randomized trial there, just demonstrated the benefit of carotid artery stenting over best medical therapy for asymptomatic carotid disease. Symptomatic carotid disease already gets treated. Coronary disease is made, I think we understand it well, that AMI treatment, when you have an acute myocardial infarction, that's well treated with coronary stents and targeting the culprit lesion. But, in terms of diffuse coronary disease, coronary artery bypass graft surgery still looks superior to intervention because it prevents future heart attacks, future AMI, by bypassing other segments that are at risk. In structural heart disease, the treatment of aortic stenosis with TAVR, which is what I pioneered, has become a fairly mature procedure. Takes about an hour. Patients go home the next day. This used to be 9 days in the hospital with open heart surgery. So it's been a huge improvement over that for those patients. And I think, when we see durability, that's the only real question, is treating younger patients, because tissue valves don't last forever. So, the real question is, how do we treat younger patients? That's a smaller percentage of the market, but, that we're still a need there, is to, prove durability of transcatheter valves in younger patients. Then we have other valvular disease, mitral valve disease. We have repair technologies, which is called edge-to-edge repair. That treats probably 15 to 20% of that disease. A big opportunity to really develop technologies there. There's a lot of people that have been working on that for quite a few years, but that's not we don't know what that looks like yet. So that's an unmet need. We have early therapies for tricuspid. Again, maybe 10% of patients can be treated with this edge-to-edge repair. Edwards now has a replacement product that goes there, but we still need some refinement. They have about a 30% serious adverse event rate from that therapy, so that needs to get better over time. So I think those therapies for tricuspid, which is a big opportunity, are yet to be developed. There's early therapies in aortic insufficiency, which is a leakage in the aortic valve. There's some early technologies there that look promising, but again, don't have regulatory approval. We don't have a standard of care yet for those. And then I would say finally is the whole area of treating patients with heart failure. The whole idea of interventional heart failure therapy is fairly new. There have been some early designs of products focused on that, both acute decompensated heart failure to help treat those patients and get them out faster and more efficiently, and in treating the chronic disease. So we're very early in those therapies. There's a big need there. We still have 6.7 million patients in the United States who have heart failure, and about 1.2 million acute hospitalizations a year. And it is the second most costly, the most costly expense to Medicare and Medicaid is heart failure, and the second leading cause for hospitalization, only second to giving birth to babies. So big needs to improve that therapy. So that's tells you we got a long way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think with the introduction of AI, I would be interested to get your view on that. Do you think that lends a lot of opportunity to address some of those things you've spoken about?
So I think, AI has several potential implications to us. One is, I think AI can improve efficiency of product development. I think about a lot of the documentation we do is repetitive. We can train AI to do some of that documentation based upon, we give it new inputs, we train it in our documentation, and it generates a first draft. That can really improve efficiency because a lot of what we do is somewhat repetitive, but with new data. Second thing is we can learn how to query better. In other words, to gather the information around a new therapy or a new technology or material science, assembling information can be more efficient. And then thirdly, I think, on the diagnostic side, dealing with all of the information that we can get from continuous monitoring, again, something very early in development, things like wearables. Wearables will produce much more than terabytes of information for us to deal with. But what's important to look at? No physician's going to be looking at that continuously. We need AI to look at that and sort through it. And we can use the machine learning algorithms to improve the diagnostic paradigm. And those things, I think, will be really important. So I see big opportunities to monitor patients as we discharge them from the hospital and for chronic therapy at home. And AI will play a big role in that.
Absolutely. And I want to pick your brain on, you would have seen lots in your time. Let's be honest, most MedTech companies do fail. And it would be great to kind of get your insights as to what do you think are the main reasons where do people go wrong, essentially is where I'm trying to get at. What do you think are the main things that you see that people aren't going about things in the right way?
Well, I think, especially kind of in the startup world, I think people get emotionally attached to their invention. And it's hard to be objective about evaluating that technology that maybe you helped create. In the context of emerging competition, markets, and what it's going to take to develop your product. So I think objectivity and really listening to what people have to say about the technology you're developing is really critical. It's hard to get your head around some of the markets and the market dynamics when you've been focused on product development. So I think that's where I see most people getting things wrong, is not appreciating competitive efforts, where your product fits in, how it has to, what level of performance is required for it to really make a difference. And sometimes there overly optimistic about the amount of effort and time it takes to develop new products. And when people come in and they underestimate that, they look like amateurs.
So just in terms of an action there, would you say more research and development needs to take place by companies before or whilst doing product development? Is that kind of what you're alluding to? Or?
No, what I'm suggesting is it's not all about product development. It's about market development. It's about what does the market look like. In other words, think of it this way. Venture capitalists are asking the question constantly, is this, when I put dollars into this, what are the chances that the risk of this going through the gauntlet of product development is going to pay back my dollars? In other words, that opportunity has to be big enough to be worth the risk involved. If you're doing incremental development, well, I know it will work. I don't know whether it will work well enough to be really competitive. And if I'm doing breakthrough innovation, I don't really know whether it will work at all, whether it meets a standard that will actually change the fundamental market. So a lot of the questions you're asking have to do with how will this compete, not will it work or not. So what I'm suggesting is that developers either access market expertise or develop market expertise so that they better understand that themselves and can communicate that to potential venture capitalists or sources of funding. If you don't really understand the market, how are you going to develop anything? Most products don't fail because they fail technically. Most products fail because we didn't understand the market dynamics. We didn't understand the patient needs. We didn't understand the reimbursement. We didn't really understand the regulatory process.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I just want to pick your brain on a couple of more bits before I let you go. So do you actually think then a lot of devices are over-engineered then as well from your perspective? Are people adding a lot of incremental things which the market doesn't actually see the cost benefit actually working?
Well, I wouldn't call that over-engineered. To me is when you try to perfect a product before you know it works or not.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. I think in this circumstance, what you're really trying to do is to say, I don't start learning with a brand new product until I get into first in human, typically, because the early animal studies tell me a little bit about safety and a little bit about the procedure, but they don't replicate humans at all. They don't replicate the disease state or the anatomy or the pathology. So I begin my learning when I go into first in human. I have to be able to adapt to them. So I think in those early stages, what's critical is that it's going to take you a lot of money to get into first in human and to do that early learning. You need to make sure that market opportunity is large enough for the dollars it costs to make sense. This is differentiated enough to matter. I frequently tell people, we have two questions. Does it work? It doesn't work well enough. Does it work? Pretty easy to figure out, right? Does it work as intended? Does it work well enough? It's very complicated and very nuanced. Well enough for what? Well enough for patients to know a difference. Well enough for physicians to be enthusiastic about it. well enough for hospitals to want to adopt it, well enough for regulators to want to approve it, well enough for payers to want to pay for it.
So from everything you're saying there, then it's so important to be engaging with all those people that you've mentioned, because it's so easy to, I guess, get so siloed in your passion and your emotion that you've spoken about. I'm going to keep developing this thing, but you're not talking to all these important stakeholders, and you find you're completely misaligned. So that quite essentially.
Yeah.
Fortunately. Look, I've taken so much of your time. Probably the last thing I do want to ask you is, for any sort of MedTech founder or leader starting, you've already shared so much insights of advice, but if you kind of in a nutshell say, what would you say to people on that journey, the tough old journey? You've done it, you've seen it. What would you say to someone today to give themselves the best possible chance?
I think what we do for a living is a privilege. We do things that change the practice of medicine and help patients. And the most rewarding thing that will ever happen in your career is to have a patient tell you how you have impacted their life through the efforts that you put into making a new therapy or a better therapy for them. And if we keep our sights on that improvement, how do we help patients? It's really hard to go wrong.
Love that, Stan. Look, I feel very privileged to have had this time with you, and I feel I've learned a lot. And I'm sure for people listening, they'll get so many insights out of everything you've told. So thank you so much for your time, and really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Junaid. Really nice talking with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good day. Thanks.
Okay.